Let's see if we're live and things are working. I hope everybody had a fantastic weekend as always. We'll give it another second. It looks like it's still getting going. Okay, I think we're gonna be okay. Hello. Welcome to this week's live Monday Music Motivation. This one's gonna be a fun topic as always, but today I brought some sort of examples and some evidence to share to sort of explain what I'm talking about and show you and have you experience it firsthand. And what I'm talking about today is this idea that whenever we look at new music, not like contemporary new music, but just a piece of music that is new to us, it's always going to look and feel harder than it actually is. And it's a really interesting phenomenon. I find that this happens with beginners and it happens even with professionals. And even for myself, I'll get a new piece of music and start looking at it and be like, whoa, this is crazy. There's going to be a lot of hard stuff to figure out and things that I need to work on. And then I'll start playing through it. Sometimes I can sight read through it and it actually turns out fine and wasn't as complicated as I thought. Sometimes with just a little bit of practice and a little bit of learning, it starts to come together and get into the fingers. And I think the more and more experience you have, of course, the more quickly things will become familiar. But I really believe no matter what level you're at in your playing, new music always looks hard. And the reason why it looks hard is because it's simply unfamiliar. And that's really, I think, such a better word to use than hard. So stop saying, oh, this music's so difficult, this music's so challenging. The music is just unfamiliar. And even the hardest music that you've ever played is really just unfamiliar. Think about something like the Nielsen Concerto. The Nielsen Concerto is a very difficult, very challenging piece. But I think that's really only because it has a lot of things that are unfamiliar. Nielsen's harmonic language is a little bit different than we're sort of used to doing. There's some rhythmic things, there's cadenzas in there, there's things in there that we don't practice regularly. Whereas Mozart is hard because of all the stylistic things, but the notes and rhythms actually aren't that challenging because it's mostly using major and minor scales, major and minor arpeggios, dominant seventh arpeggios, things like that we are familiar with. And I think really if you get down to it, that's the only reason why Mozart is easier than Nielsen, is because there's more things that we're more familiar with and we're more used to practicing that show up in Mozart compared to something like Nielsen. Here's my little example for this. This is a little tiny excerpt from the enthusiast choir that we're going to be doing at Clarinet Fest coming up next week in 2024 in Dublin. And at first glance, this looks really challenging. If you look at this music, you're like, oh my goodness, super fast notes, changing subdivisions, there's accidentals in there. This is insanely difficult. But if you take a second to look a little bit closer, don't look at the E flat part because it's a little bit more complicated. But even the E flat part, actually, that was a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I'm looking at the E flat part and I'm like, oh, there's even more accidentals in there and there's sharps and naturals. Oh my goodness, that's going to be so tricky and so challenging. But even the E flat part is more or less just a scale. We have one D sharp at the beginning, and then it gets canceled out with a D natural later. We have C sharp, F sharp, F sharp, C sharp. It's just a D major scale with that one change where it starts the measure on a D sharp and in the middle of the measure goes to a D natural. But more or less, it's just a D major scale. The B flat clarinet parts, just G major scales. It's only F sharp. So even though we're seeing multiple accidentals, those accidentals are only F sharps, which makes it a G major scale. And yes, there's the changing subdivisions, and we aren't familiar with going from sixteenths to quintuplets to sextuplets to septuplets. That's not a subdivision exercise that we normally do, so we're going to have to get familiar with that, and that's going to be hard at first. But we are familiar with our G major or D major scale, probably, so that's not actually going to be that challenging to get the notes. So even something like that at first glance is like, oh my gosh, I could never play this. Take a second, think through it, figure out what's going on, learn the music, and it'll become familiar. And the more familiar it is, the more easy it will be. So that's kind of my inspiration and motivation for you today, is to not panic when you see new music. Trust that it's a normal experience to kind of have a little bit of freak out of like, whoa, that's crazy, that's unfamiliar, that's really challenging. And I also want you to kind of shift that perspective. There's not really any music that's inherently more difficult or inherently harder than other music. It's just music that's less familiar. If you grew up practicing harmonies from the Nielsen Concerto as your warm-ups and your scales, and did the scales and the patterns that are in Nielsen more than you did the more straightforward major and minor scales and arpeggios that are in Mozart, then you would actually find Nielsen to be easier than Mozart. Most of us don't learn that way, so most of us can objectively agree that Nielsen is harder than Mozart, but remember that difficulty always really only comes down to familiarity. So don't panic when something's unfamiliar. Just take some time to get familiar with it, practice it, and it will become easier. And now that leads us to the most important part of the Live Monday Music Motivation, which is to plan your practice and plan what you're going to get familiar with. And I challenge you, as you're filling out your template for today, to think about, what's something that I've been kind of intimidated by, kind of scared by? Can I go in there and get familiar with it and really work it out? So the template, which you can get at quickstartclarinet.com/get started, or you can just copy it here. It's the date for the week, the reflection of how things are going, your goal for what you want to accomplish this week, and then your plan for when you're going to do it and what you're going to do so that you're setting yourself up to achieve that goal for this week. I see Belle Ellie commented, I get excited by new music and love the challenge. Yeah, that's fantastic. And the other part of that too is you can kind of see that new music, and yes, you're unfamiliar with it. Yes, it's a little intimidating, but it's an opportunity to get more familiar with the patterns in that music too. So yeah, that's fantastic. And I hope everybody's excited to tackle some new music this week, and you fill it out in your template and get that going. So thanks so much for being here and for watching. I have one other thing that I need to tell you about, which is that there won't be a Live Monday Music Motivation for the next 2 weeks, because I'm going to be traveling to Dublin for Clarinet Fest this year and playing some of that fun, unfamiliar music in the Enthusiast Choir. So I won't see you for the next 2 weeks, and the next Live Monday Music Motivation will be on August 12th. So thanks so much for watching. Keep filling out your template every week and getting things going and having those goals and achieving those goals each week. And I can't wait to see where you're at when I get back on the 12th. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in 3 weeks from today on the next Live Monday Music Motivation. Have a great weekend.